Welcome to How We Work Now, where we explore how people are reshaping the modern workplace through lived experience with neurodiversity, chronic illness, and disability. Today I'm joined by Dr. LaToya Hinton, PhD. She is an educator, researcher, and grant writer who founded Toybird Positive Impact Funding, a neurodivergent owned consultancy business helping social enterprises and nonprofits secure funding for projects that empower marginalized youth. LaToya, I'm so glad to have you here today. Would you like to introduce yourself in your own words?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Anita. If I could be super brief, introducing myself, I guess I would just say that my neurodivergence has really helped me to be quite a bit of a dabbler in my career, and I really lean into that as a strength. I was originally trained as an educational researcher, specifically multicultural and multilingual education. And I would say when I graduated from my PhD program in 2020, I kind of immediately went into instructional design. That was my full-time role. I also served as an adjunct professor and a subject matter expert for designing inclusive education courses. And then after a few years, I kind of decided to lean in to like my research experience a little bit more. And I decided that it would be a good idea to do a data analytics boot camp to learn a little bit more on the quantitative research side of things. I had leaned a lot into qualitative research for my dissertation project. And so I kind of wanted to even things out and then kind of think about what other job opportunities might come about with quantitative research. And so a data analytics bootcamp really fit that sort of change in focus. I finished that program in 5 months instead of 6 months. So I was really proud of myself for that. And then I worked as a director of UX research and communications at a small startup company. And then the wheels started turning in my head at that point in time because it was really tricky to allocate hours for all of our projects. I think we completed something like 16 research projects in the span of like 8 months. So it was super fast. And really hands-on, and a lot of project management was kind of happening. And I also had the communications team that was working on social media campaigns at the same time. So taking the feedback from our research that we received from our user base and translating that into messaging that we would use in social media to market our product. So it was a really nice combination of sort of like cross-functional team management, I would say, like having everyone kind of work together and understand each other's areas of focus. But it was quite a bit. And at that time, I didn't realize, I mean, I had been diagnosed with like anxiety and depression like in my 20s. So I kind of knew that I had to pace myself in terms of mental health, but I didn't know the connection with like ADHD or dyscalculia or dyspraxia or even autism. I didn't know that I could relate to a lot of those experiences as well. And so I would say that it took me a lot of time, like in a mindfulness group with other neurodivergent women, to start kind of making those connections. And then also like being able to reach out to professionals to then like get an official diagnosis for ADHD and then find like assessments for some of the other neurodivergent experiences. And so it all kind of clicked and started to sort of make sense, that I had support needs that I kind of wasn't aware of. And I think when you're in a leadership position, it really makes you super like self-compassionate and humble when you realize the kinds of support that you need actually maybe translate to a lot of your team members as well. And so it helps you to do like a lot of reflective, um, critical thinking in terms of like your management style. And so I think for me, in hindsight, of course, everything is clear. And I realized that why I was really flexible with my team members and why I really had a kind of transparent approach to team building. I kind of was really open about what my needs were in terms of flexibility, and also like direct like instructions for next steps, and like all of the sort of scaffolding and all of that kind of work for professional development. I was even just like recalling today that when I did like performance evaluations, I was very much on the side of like what kinds of training opportunities can we offer. And I think like that's very different from other managers who may not have experience with neurodiversity, because they might just kind of like assume that folks are qualified and can kind of figure out things on their own. And so I was very much, since I was trained as an educator, I had that sense of it's my responsibility to offer training. And it's also an opportunity to look at where all of the gaps are in our knowledge as a team, and like how can we help each other to fill in those knowledge gaps. And then in terms of like flexibility with timing for meetings and for time to kind of troubleshoot and problem solve together. I think I had that sense of no matter what happens, like I have your back. I'm, going to be there and make sure that you have all the support that you need to complete your projects on time. Right. So I think like there was a lot of self-reflection on what I did as a leader, that was informed by my own neurodivergent experience, that was actually really beneficial for my team members. And then also what kinds of supports did I need at that time that could have made me an even better manager that I just wasn't aware of.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's always a kind of live and learn growing process as we navigate this world. As much as it would be awesome, a lot of these things aren't laid out for us, especially for neurodivergence and people who think a little bit differently. We have to kind of figure a lot of this out on our own. So, was there a defining moment when you realized that the traditional models that we have to work under, and for work and leadership didn't fit you?
I think for me, I could always see, like, I'll take it back to when I was really young, like in elementary school. I was one of those people that created structure for like success, in the sense that I remember, I really remember getting up early in the morning, and I would go into, my parents had an office in our house that had like a family computer, but it also had like their business computer. And so when they were not working, which was like super like 5:30 in the morning or something like that, before people got up to work, I would go into that office and I would lock the door. and I would complete a lot of my assignments for school. And I remember doing this like elementary school. Like I think I was like 11 or 12 when I really like started to be a serious student, and like I felt like I needed that environment. So I created that support system for myself. And then that kind of carried throughout my entire education and into my professional experience. And so when I think about the structures, like you said, you kind of trying to figure it out by yourself, I think a lot of late identified neurodivergent folks have done that. Like we've created a lot of structures for ourselves because we didn't know what supports were available. And so we just kind of sort of winged it. And I felt like a lot of the decisions that I made from a really young age were successful for me. And so I just kind of held on to what worked. And so when I think about like having the ability to work remotely, I've definitely chosen that path so that I can control my environment that I work in. And I can only control it but so much. Like there's construction going on at my place right now. So there's always going to be distractions, but I have like my noise canceling headphones on. And then I also will put like specific music to listen to so that I can like stay focused, you know, get into hyper focus and stay focused for a certain period of time to complete tasks throughout the week. And I also just give myself a lot of breaks. Like I never before I was aware of my support needs. I would just power through things. Like I have definitely been a perfectionist in the past, but now that I have a lot more knowledge about how my brain works, I take a lot more breaks. Like even if it's just like meal breaks, bio breaks, put in little buffers between meetings. And I exercise as well. Like I'll, you know, take a lunch period to just like get on my treadmill and do yoga and stuff like that. And that helps me a lot to regulate my nervous system and just like helps me to be a bit more sustainable. When I was working face to face full time, I would do some of those things before work, right? And then like kind of do some of that stuff when I got home from work. So kind of getting myself ready for the day and then to wind down. So I think that I was kind of aware of the holistic health that, you know, I needed to be sort of taking advantage of, because I didn't always have access to like counseling services, and it would be kind of on and off where I would, you know, like have adequate insurance and stuff like that. So in times where I didn't have access to mental health care, I would go like in the whole holistic way of supporting myself. So I think like, again, there's just so many different like structures that we create for ourselves in terms of support needs. And so, yeah, I think like when we talk about what accessibility means in the workplace, I think we have to keep that in mind, that a lot of neurodivergent staff members have structures that they put in place to help themselves. And so at the same time, I think it's great as a person in a leadership position to say, you know, I, you know, struggle or have challenges with certain environments as well. And, you know, this is what I do. It might not work for you, but it's, you know, it has been something that has worked for me in the past. And so I think like having those kinds of conversations are really, really helpful, because it takes the onus and pressure away from staff members. I think it's like our duty, folks who are in leadership positions, to like set that up as like a safe space for people to talk about what makes them successful holistically.
Yes. And I think that's why I'm so excited to do this series, to kind of talk with other people who are neurodivergent, chronically ill, disabled, and discuss what systems work for you. What have you found? Because there isn't a lot of information out there on systems that people use. We're all figuring it out as we go. And so kind of getting that dialogue going and talking amongst ourselves and figuring out what does work for us, what doesn't work for us, and getting a better gauge on that, I think is something that's super helpful overall for the community. Um, are there any particular tools or practices that have been game changers for you in balancing creativity, structure, or executive function challenges?
Yes. So I would say I rely on my calendar quite a bit. And I guess I always have, but I've been paying a lot more attention to like where I need to tweak things in my calendar a little bit more. Like I reach out to people sometimes, like if, for instance, I get, more than 4 meetings on my calendar in a day, I'll reach out to someone and say, like, let's reschedule because it's really draining for me in terms of like energy exertion. To have like those back-to-back meetings like that. I kind of have like 4 is the limit because I feel like the next day I'm really recovering still from that. And so I'm just hyper aware at this point of what my limitations are. Whereas I think in the past, I used to kind of say, if that's what it takes to get our projects done, then, I'm going to have to do, the 5 meetings or whatever it is. And now that I am building my own business, I can be a lot more mindful and I can kind of say like, okay, that's going to be enough for me for the day. So that's one thing, like just paying attention to the recharge and, what that looks like for me. And yeah, setting boundaries in terms of my time. I would also say another thing that I pay quite a bit of attention to is like in terms of like how much I want to consult on particular projects. Like this is something that I'm like realizing a lot. I don't have to give away the whole enchilada of my experience. I think I'm just like a very like bubbly, like passionate person. And so I think I sometimes get a little carried away when it comes to, you know, talking about particular work projects and stuff like that. And I'm realizing that it is better to just give people a little bit of a peek into what's coming next. And then let them sort of decide if they want to learn more, right? Rather than sort of kind of giving them everything. And that's such an interesting thing to learn about in business as well, because I think that you have to think about your time and your energy and how that translates into your pricing for consulting projects and things like that. So that's something that I'm still kind of learning about. And I think it does have a lot to do with my neurodivergence because I'm really chatty. And I think that's actually really nice, and a strength to be able to build relationships with folks. But I think the flip side of it is to be mindful of, how much information you give at what time in the relationship, right?
Mm. So you've spoken about how a lot of nonprofits and social enterprises rely on a lot of short-term grants instead of building sustainable funding ecosystems. What systemic changes do you think would make the funding landscape more equitable?
I think this is such a great question. I'm super excited to answer this one because it's something that comes up in my work quite a bit. Like a lot of my clients ask me questions about like how much should they be seeking when it comes to expanding their services or their programs. And I think it depends on where you're at in your journey. Like if you're at a point where like I'll give an example without giving names. A previous client of mine had started to build quite a few partnerships with other organizations to kind of get his product out there. So it was like an ed tech company. And so he needed both educators and students to test out the product and give feedback. And also he was hoping that a certain number of the folks that participated in the pilot would then become regular users, right, of his product. And so he really was focused on the partnerships. And so we did a lot of really nice data analytics in terms of the engagement for each one of his partnerships. And I really explained that that's one way to grow without actually needing external funding. And then it impresses investors and like private foundations who issue grants, because it shows that like with or without their help, like you still are able to scale. And so I think things like that in the neurodivergent community, and this particular founder that I was working with was openly neurodivergent and was creating a product for neurodivergent youth. Right. And even neurodivergent adults, right, who are educators. So it was one of those situations where I was like, we don't talk about that enough, I think, in the neurodivergent community, that our partnerships can really set us apart when we are kind of growing, whether we have a nonprofit or whether we have a for-profit organization, because really you don't want to be doing anything on your own. You really want to show your reach and a very high level of engagement in what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And those numbers are going to be very persuasive for external funders in terms of the importance of what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
So, what advice would you give to other neurodivergent or mission-driven founders trying to design work that truly fits them and, their goals in life?
I think I can't reiterate enough to not do things on your own. I think that when you have like a lot of really great ideas and you're kind of like, oh, at least for me personally, like when I have a lot of ideas, I kind of want to like execute on everything at once. And I realized that it actually has to kind of go a little bit like step by step. And each step of the way, I've realized that I can reach out to folks who can be long-term partners. And I think that is what is going to ultimately allow me to sustain the work that I'm doing. Because if I think that I can do things by myself, I may be able to do it for a very short period of time before I hit level of burnout. And so it's about my support needs, but it's also about expanding my reach, right? And so this is something that I talk about in terms of consulting for long-term financial planning, but it's also a way, a strategy for staying in business, essentially. Because when I think about how to create like my own networking events, right? Like, because as neurodivergent people, like a lot of times we don't want to do like the regular networking events where, it's like speed dating and, like that sometimes is overwhelming for us, right? And so I think like it's super empowering to say like, I'm going to create my own networking event and I'm going to do it my way. But then in order to do that, you have to kind of have folks that will partner with you to do that, right? The more partnerships you have, the access to larger networks that you have. And so you're going to have a larger turnout by doing that. And so the Neurodivergent Women Leaders Creative Mentorship and Support page on LinkedIn is one of the ways that I have done that. I've met a lot of neurodivergent women leaders on that platform in like a virtual way, but also face to face in my local community. And I'm realizing that those are the people who already want to partner with me and are kind of ready to take it to the next step of like planning out events and things like that. Because visibility is really important, representation is really important. And in order to do that, we have to build these sustainable networks. And I think that starts with each other in the neurodivergent community. And it's something that is changing, you know, a system that is actually tangible, like something that we actually can, you know, exert some sort of positive force on, right? Because I think
Mhm.
sometimes when we talk about systemic things, a lot of times we feel like it's out of our hands. Like we feel like
Yeah.
there are these institutional systems in place that, you know, just one or two of us can't do anything to change. But if we have a large group that is changing the game together, I think that we open up these opportunities for us to sustain our work and then thrive.
I love that, LaToya. I only have a couple minutes left, but I'm so glad that you came today and were willing to do this interview with me and speak about your experiences and, advice for other neurodivergent people who are making their own way in their careers. Is there, anything else you want to share quickly before we wrap up?
I would just say, for those who are just starting out and are thinking, oh, I want to start my own nonprofit or I want to be a small business owner, but it just seems like there are a lot of working pieces and I'm not sure like um, what my next steps will be for funding and like there's just a lot to think about. I think what's really good is to start with your interests. Start with the stuff that motivates you, that you're not going to get like tired of in a very short period of time, right? Like what's like fueling your passion and your motivation, and then start reaching out to neurodivergent collaborators who have similar interests to you and plan out things together, because I think that is going to give you accountability buddies as well to keep you on track. And at the same time, you know, you're going to be building friendships with people, and you know, it's just going to be enjoyable. Just try not to do things on your own, because I think that our natural inclination as folks who have been left on our own to figure out our own structures is to like take it all on. But
Mm.
the reality of the situation is there's, you know, strength in numbers. And if you really want to
Perfect.
sustain what it is that you're doing, you've got to get outside of your comfort zone, but you've got to do it in a way that makes sense for your brain. And
Mhm.
so that's what I recommend. And I'm just so happy that you had me on to talk today.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that'll conclude our show for the day. I want to thank you one more time and, wish you have a wonderful rest of the day. I'll see you
Awesome,
later.
Anita.
Bye.